Power does not announce itself. It does not raise its voice. It does not explain its intentions. Power observes first, it waits, it measures, and when it moves, it does so quietly enough that most people mistake it for coincidence. This is where the misunderstanding begins for almost everyone. They think power is loud, aggressive, dominant in posture and tone. That belief alone disqualifies them from ever touching real influence. Because real power prefers to remain unseen until the moment resistance is no longer possible. The Machiavellian mindset is not about cruelty. That is the first lie people believe. Cruelty is emotional. It is reactive. It leaks intention. The Machiavellian mindset is about clarity without sentiment, action without attachment, and understanding human behavior without needing to moralize it. Machiavelli did not teach people to be evil. He taught them to see. And once you see, you cannot unsee how predictable human behavior becomes when stripped of comforting illusions. Most people live inside narratives, stories they tell themselves about who they are, what the world is, and how others should behave. These narratives are emotional safety blankets. They reduce anxiety, they simplify complexity, but they also make people controllable, because anyone who can shape the story you believe is quietly shaping your decisions. The Machiavellian does not fight narratives emotionally. They observe which narratives people are enslaved to and then position themselves accordingly. Power dynamics exist everywhere, even when no one names them. In families, in friendships, in workplaces, in romantic relationships, in spiritual groups, even in conversations that appear equal on the surface. Someone always has more leverage, emotional, informational, psychological, or situational. The mistake most people make is assuming power is fixed. It is not. Power flows to whoever understands the moment better than everyone else in the room. Psychological influence begins with one truth that is uncomfortable but unavoidable. People do not act based on logic. They act based on identity protection and emotional safety. Logic comes later, if at all. This is why facts rarely change minds, but stories do. This is why people defend beliefs that actively harm them. And this is why power does not argue with belief systems, it redirects them. The Machiavellian mindset studies incentives, not intentions. Intentions are cheap. Everyone has them. Incentives reveal truth. What does a person gain by acting the way they do? What fear are they avoiding? What identity are they protecting? Once you understand that, behavior becomes readable, not controllable in a cartoonish sense, but predictable. And predictability is the foundation of influence. There is a reason silence is so powerful. Silence forces projection. When you do not explain yourself, people fill the gap with their own assumptions. And assumptions always reveal more about the thinker than the silent observer. The Machiavellian does not rush to clarify misunderstandings. They allow others to reveal their fears, expectations, and insecurities through interpretation. Information is gathered without asking a single question. Most people believe dominance means asserting yourself, correcting others, being seen, being heard. But dominance at its highest level is the ability to shape outcomes without appearing responsible for them. It is the capacity to let others believe they chose freely, while every available option was quietly framed in advance. This is where morality becomes complicated for those who have never examined it deeply. Morality is a social technology. It stabilizes groups. It rewards conformity. It punishes deviation. That does not make it useless, but it does make it conditional. Power understands morality as a context, not a commandment. It knows when to use it, when to appear aligned with it, and when to step outside of it without being seen. The average person believes the world is run by rules, laws, policies, procedures. Those things exist, but they are not what decides outcomes. Outcomes are decided by relationships, leverage, perception, and timing. Rules are enforced selectively, interpreted flexibly, and ignored quietly when inconvenient. The Machiavellian mindset does not rebel against rules emotionally. It learns how they bend under pressure. Psychological influence is rarely direct. Direct pressure creates resistance. Resistance creates awareness. Awareness creates opposition. Influence works sideways. It works through framing, through suggestion, through environmental cues, through repetition, through authority signals, through social proof, through scarcity, through fear of exclusion. None of these are accidental. They are studied, refined, and deployed constantly, often against people who believe they are independent thinkers. Consider this: if you know what someone fears losing, you already have leverage. If you know what they want to be seen as, you can guide their behavior without force. Identity is the deepest hook. Threaten it, and people panic. Validate it, and they open. Power does not shout commands. It whispers affirmations that steer behavior. This is why emotional control is non-negotiable. Uncontrolled emotion leaks information. Anger reveals insecurity. Defensiveness reveals attachment. Excitement reveals desire. Fear reveals weakness. The Machiavellian mindset treats emotion as data, not as a guide. Emotions are observed internally, not obeyed. Externally, the emotions of others are studied for patterns. Many people believe manipulation is something bad people do. This belief is comforting because it implies safety. But manipulation is simply influence without consent, and influence is happening to you constantly, whether you like it or not. Advertising, politics, religion, social norms, family expectations, shame, praise, silence, all of these shape behavior. Refusing to understand manipulation does not make you moral, it makes you defenseless. The difference between exploitation and mastery lies in awareness. The unaware are controlled by systems they do not understand. The aware can choose when to participate, when to resist, and when to reshape the game entirely. The Machiavellian mindset is not about dominating others for pleasure. It is about never being naive in a world that rewards the opposite. Power also understands timing. Force applied at the wrong moment is weakness. Patience is not passive, it is strategic restraint. Watching patterns repeat, letting people reveal their cycles, waiting for emotional exhaustion, waiting for urgency, waiting until resistance collapses under its own weight, then acting once, cleanly. People reveal themselves under pressure, not because pressure changes them, but because it removes the energy required to maintain masks. This is why crises are dangerous and revealing at the same time. The Machiavellian does not rush to fix chaos. They observe who panics, who blames, who adapts, who takes responsibility, and who freezes. This information is priceless. Another uncomfortable truth: most people want to be led, not because they are weak, but because constant decision-making is exhausting. Uncertainty creates anxiety. Clarity, even imposed clarity, feels like relief. This is why strong narratives attract loyalty. This is why confidence is mistaken for competence. This is why people follow those who appear certain, even when they are wrong. The Machiavellian mindset understands this hunger for certainty and uses it carefully. Too much control breeds rebellion. Too little breeds chaos. Influence is a balance between structure and freedom, enough guidance to reduce anxiety, enough autonomy to maintain dignity. Power dynamics are not static hierarchies, they are fluid negotiations. Someone with formal authority can be powerless if they lack respect. Someone without status can dominate if they control information, emotion, or timing. This is why appearances deceive. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. Observe who speaks last. Observe who interrupts and who is never interrupted. Observe whose absence changes the room's energy. Observe who others look to when something goes wrong. These are the real indicators. The Machiavellian mindset also understands self-deception. The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. I'm a good person. I would never do that. I'm not like them. These statements are not facts. They are identity shields. They prevent growth. Because if you believe you are incapable of darkness, you will never recognize it when it appears inside you or in others. Power comes from integration, not denial. The ability to acknowledge your capacity for aggression, manipulation, selfishness, and dominance without being ruled by them is what creates internal stability. Those who deny their shadow are controlled by it. Those who integrate it control themselves. This is why naive goodness is fragile. It collapses under pressure. It becomes bitter, resentful, moralistic. Strategic goodness, on the other hand, is stable. It understands the rules of the game and chooses its moves deliberately. It does not rely on the world to be fair, it adapts. Most people are trained from childhood to seek approval. This creates a psychological leash. Approval seeking makes people predictable. Withdraw validation and they chase. Offer it selectively and they comply. The Machiavellian mindset cuts this leash internally first. Once you are no longer dependent on external validation, you become harder to control. Control begins with self-control, not repression, regulation, the ability to delay reaction, to sit with discomfort, to let silence do the work, to choose response instead of reflex. This alone puts you ahead of the majority who are constantly broadcasting their internal state through impulsive behavior. This part matters deeply. Power does not come from wanting power. It comes from understanding human nature and positioning yourself accordingly. Those who crave dominance reveal insecurity. Those who understand dynamics rarely need to assert themselves. Influence accumulates naturally around clarity, restraint, and reliability. The world rewards results, not intentions. It remembers outcomes, not explanations. Power accepts this without resentment. It does not complain about reality, it studies it. And here is the quiet truth most people avoid. Once you see how power works, you are responsible for how you use that knowledge. Ignorance grants innocence. Awareness removes it. This is the weight that comes with clarity. Not everyone is ready for it. Because the moment you truly understand power dynamics, you also realize how much of your past behavior was shaped without your consent, how many choices were nudged, how many fears were installed, how many identities were inherited rather than chosen. And that realization leads somewhere dangerous. Because once you see the machinery, the next question becomes unavoidable. What parts of your mind are not actually yours? That is where this goes next. Nothing in you is accidental. That belief is comforting, but it is false. Before you ever learned how to speak properly, before you understood rules or morality, your nervous system was already learning what is safe, what is dangerous, what earns love, and what causes rejection. This learning did not happen through logic. It happened through repetition, emotion, and survival. That is the origin of the shadow. Shadow work is not spirituality. It is not aesthetics. It is not journaling with candles. It is forensic psychology applied inward. It is the process of identifying the parts of you that were formed under pressure and then quietly took control while you were busy believing you were being yourself. The shadow is everything in you that learned to adapt when honesty was punished. If expressing anger led to abandonment, anger went underground. If vulnerability led to ridicule, openness was buried. If obedience earned praise, compliance became identity. If dominance brought safety, control hardened into habit. None of this required consent. The subconscious does not ask permission. It installs whatever patterns keep the organism alive. This is why adults repeat childhood dynamics without understanding why. Why people chase partners who replicate emotional neglect. Why authority triggers irrational fear or rebellion. Why some people sabotage success just before stability arrives. These are not personality flaws, they are programs. The subconscious does not care about truth, it cares about familiarity. Familiarity feels safe, even when it is destructive. This is why change feels threatening, even when it is positive. Your conscious mind wants growth, your subconscious wants survival based on old data. This is the conflict most people never resolve. They try to think positive, their way out of deeply installed survival code. It does not work. The subconscious does not respond to affirmations. It responds to evidence and repetition. Shadow work begins when you stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and start asking, "What did this pattern protect me from?" That question removes shame. Shame keeps the shadow hidden. Curiosity exposes it. Most people fear their shadow because they associate it with being bad, immoral, dangerous. But the shadow is not evil. It is unintegrated power, energy that learned it was not allowed to exist openly. When aggression is suppressed, it mutates into passive aggression. When desire is suppressed, it becomes manipulation. When fear is suppressed, it becomes control. When ambition is suppressed, it becomes resentment. Nothing disappears, it only changes form. Subconscious programming operates through loops. Trigger right arrow, emotion right arrow, behavior right arrow, outcome right arrow, reinforcement. Once installed, these loops run automatically. The conscious mind arrives late and calls the outcome choice. This is why willpower fails. Willpower fights habits at the surface. Programming lives beneath. Consider how early authority figures shaped you. Parents, teachers, religious leaders, social groups. Their reactions taught you what parts of yourself were acceptable. Acceptance is survival for a child, so the child fragments. One part performs, another hides, another watches. That watcher becomes the shadow. It remembers everything you pretend not to. The mind is extremely efficient. Once it finds a strategy that reduces pain, it keeps it, even when the environment changes. This is why people who grew up in chaos feel uncomfortable in peace, why silence feels threatening, why stillness triggers anxiety. The nervous system is calibrated for danger. Calm feels unfamiliar. Subconscious programming is reinforced socially. Culture rewards certain traits and punishes others. Society teaches you what success looks like, what masculinity means, what femininity should be, what failure feels like. These templates sink deep. People confuse them for personal truth. The dark reality is this: most people are living lives they did not consciously choose, driven by patterns installed before they had language. Power understands this. This is why influence targets emotion, not intellect. Fear-based messaging bypasses logic and hits the limbic system. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates acceptance. Acceptance becomes belief. Belief drives behavior. Propaganda works because it mirrors childhood conditioning. Authority speaks. Uncertainty is resolved. Identity is reinforced. Dissent is punished socially. The body remembers this pattern. Shadow work requires confronting something most people avoid: your capacity for manipulation, avoidance, cruelty, and self-deception. Not to indulge it, but to reclaim agency from it. When you deny your shadow, it controls you unconsciously. When you integrate it, it becomes available energy. Integration does not mean acting out impulses. It means owning them internally, acknowledging this urge exists in me without acting blindly. Awareness interrupts automation. This is where dominance over self begins. The subconscious communicates through symbols and sensations, not words. Anxiety is not random. Attraction is not accidental. Aversion is not irrational. They are signals. The mistake is obeying them without interrogation. Ask different questions. What does this emotion want me to do? What happens if I don't obey it? Who benefits if I act on it? Most people never pause long enough to ask. There is a reason certain topics trigger defensiveness instantly. Identity protection activates before thought. When identity is threatened, logic shuts down. This is why arguments escalate. The subconscious interprets disagreement as danger. Powerful individuals train themselves to notice the moment emotion rises and delay response. This creates space. Space creates choice. Choice creates freedom. Subconscious programming also explains self-sabotage. Success threatens identity when identity was formed around struggle. If you learned love through suffering, peace feels empty. If attention came through pain, stability feels invisible. The shadow will destroy what it believes endangers familiarity. This is why people sabotage relationships right when intimacy deepens, why they procrastinate before breakthroughs, why they create chaos when things get quiet. The nervous system is trying to return to known territory. Shadow work asks you to sit in unfamiliar calm until it becomes normal. This is not comfortable. Discomfort is the withdrawal symptom of leaving old programming. Another layer: moral conditioning. Many people were taught that power is wrong, desire is dangerous, ambition is selfish, anger is bad. These beliefs do not remove the impulses, they drive them underground. Underground impulses do not disappear, they leak sideways. This creates moral hypocrisy. People condemn publicly what they indulge privately. They judge others to avoid facing themselves. The shadow feeds on denial. True discipline comes from honesty, not suppression. This is why people who preach morality loudly often lack internal control. They outsource regulation to rules. When rules are absent, chaos appears. Shadow integration creates internal order. Subconscious programming also shapes perception. The brain filters reality based on prior belief. Confirmation bias is not intellectual, it is emotional. The mind seeks evidence that preserves identity. This is why people resist information that contradicts their self-image. The shadow guards identity like a bouncer. Anything threatening is rejected before analysis. To reprogram the mind, identity must loosen. Rigidity is the enemy of growth. Flexibility allows new data. This is where most fail. They want new outcomes without changing self-concept. But the subconscious obeys identity, not goals. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, ease will feel wrong. If you see yourself as not powerful, influence will be avoided. If you see yourself as good, darkness will be projected outward. Shadow work dissolves these rigid labels. It does this by forcing you to confront questions you were trained not to ask. What do I enjoy that I pretend not to? What part of me wants control? What part of me fears being seen? What part of me benefits from staying stuck? These answers are not flattering, they are freeing. The moment you stop lying to yourself, internal conflict reduces, energy returns, clarity sharpens, power stabilizes. This is why shadow work feels heavy at first and then strangely calming. Chaos exists only where truth is resisted. Subconscious reprogramming requires new experiences, not new thoughts. Thoughts follow experience. This is why exposure works better than affirmation. Act differently while tolerating discomfort. The nervous system updates its map. Stillness is critical here. Silence allows suppressed material to surface. Distraction keeps the shadow hidden. This is why constant stimulation is addictive. It prevents self-confrontation. Most people are not afraid of darkness, they are afraid of stillness. Because in stillness, the shadow speaks. And when it does, it reveals something unsettling. Many of your choices were reactions. Many of your values were inherited. Many of your fears were taught. This realization destabilizes identity. And that destabilization is necessary. Because before the mind can be rewired, it must be unfrozen. That is what comes next. Most people believe they think. What they actually do is react intelligently. This distinction matters more than it appears. Reaction feels like thought because it uses language, logic, and memory, but reaction is still automatic. It is the mind moving along pre-installed tracks, selecting from familiar explanations, defending familiar identities, and reaching familiar conclusions. Real thinking is rare because it is uncomfortable. It destabilizes certainty. It threatens identity. It removes the psychological ground people stand on. Deep thinking begins where comfort ends. The human mind did not evolve to discover truth. It evolved to reduce uncertainty fast enough to survive. Speed mattered more than accuracy. Cohesion mattered more than correctness. Belonging mattered more than honesty. These priorities are still embedded in cognition. Modern life did not update the software, it only increased the complexity of the environment. This is why intelligent people can believe false things with confidence. Intelligence increases the ability to rationalize, not the ability to see clearly. A sharp mind can build beautiful arguments in defense of completely distorted premises. The smarter the person, the more convincing the self-deception. This is cognitive bias. Cognitive bias is not a flaw, it is a feature. It conserves energy, it preserves identity, it allows quick decisions, but it also traps perception. Once a belief forms, the mind begins filtering reality to protect it. Evidence that supports the belief feels satisfying. Evidence that contradicts it feels threatening. This emotional reaction happens before conscious thought. That sequence matters. Emotion, right arrow perception, right arrow thought, right arrow explanation. Most people believe it is thought first. It is not. Confirmation bias ensures you notice what aligns and ignore what disrupts. Availability bias makes recent or vivid information feel more important than it is. Authority bias causes deference to perceived expertise even when it is wrong. Social proof convinces people that popularity equals truth. Loss aversion makes people cling to bad decisions because admitting error feels worse than continuing. None of this is rare, it is universal. The illusion is believing you are exempt. Deep thinking requires stepping outside these automatic loops. Not occasionally, consistently. It means distrusting your first interpretation. It means questioning emotional certainty. It means treating your own beliefs as hypotheses, not identities. This threatens the ego. The ego is not arrogance. It is self-continuity. It maintains a story of who you are over time. It resists contradiction because contradiction implies instability. Instability feels like danger. So the ego defends itself by rejecting information, attacking sources, or reframing reality. This is why arguments rarely change minds. Changing a belief often requires a controlled collapse of identity. Without that collapse, information is simply repurposed to strengthen existing narratives. Deep thinkers accept this cost. They allow parts of themselves to dissolve. They tolerate uncertainty without rushing to closure. They remain in the question longer than most people can stand. This patience is a form of dominance. Because rushed conclusions are easy to influence, unsettled minds are manipulable, certainty creates rigidity, rigidity creates predictability. Power understands how people think poorly and builds systems around those weaknesses. Consider how decision-making is framed in modern environments. Options are limited, language is loaded, urgency is manufactured, fear is highlighted, reward is exaggerated, choice appears free, but the frame determines the outcome. This is not accidental. The mind is lazy under pressure. It defaults to heuristics. Heuristics are shortcuts. Shortcuts save energy, but shortcuts bypass analysis. The more stressed the mind, the more primitive the decision-making. This is why emotional regulation precedes clarity. You cannot think deeply in a dysregulated state. Your nervous system decides before your intellect gets a vote. Deep thinking, therefore, begins with slowing the internal tempo. Silence is not absence. It is a tool. In silence, automatic thoughts surface. In stillness, emotional reactions reveal themselves. Most people avoid silence because it exposes the machinery of their mind. Distraction keeps the illusion intact. Another barrier to deep thinking is narrative addiction. Humans crave meaning. The mind stitches events into stories even when none exist. Randomness feels threatening. Stories restore control, but stories distort causality. People confuse correlation with intention. They assume outcomes were inevitable. They assign motives retroactively. They simplify complex systems into moral tales. This makes the world feel understandable and falsely predictable. Deep thinking resists narrative closure. It allows ambiguity. It accepts that multiple causes can coexist. It holds competing explanations without rushing to resolve them. This is mentally taxing, which is why most people do not do it. Cognitive bias also explains why people overestimate their knowledge. The more you know, the more you realize how little you understand. Confidence often peaks at superficial understanding. This is the danger zone where belief is strong but depth is weak. Deep thinkers remain suspicious of confidence, especially their own. Another bias worth confronting is attribution error. People explain their own failures through context and others' failures through character. I was under pressure versus they are incompetent. This preserves self-image but distorts reality. It prevents learning. Deep thinking reverses this reflex. It assumes responsibility first, not out of guilt, but out of agency. If you are the variable, you can change the outcome. Most people prefer innocence over power. This preference keeps them comfortable and stuck. The ability to think deeply also requires separating information from interpretation. Information is data. Interpretation is meaning assigned. Most people confuse the two. They treat interpretations as facts. This leads to rigid thinking. When someone says, "This always happens to me," that is interpretation, not fact. When someone says, "People can't be trusted," that is a narrative, not evidence. These statements feel true because they are emotionally reinforced, not because they are accurate. Deep thinkers interrogate language. They notice absolutes: always, never, everyone, no one. These words signal emotional reasoning. Power listens carefully to how people speak. Language reveals mental structure. Vague language hides confusion. Aggressive language hides fear. Overly complex language hides uncertainty. Clarity is not verbosity. Clarity is precision. Another obstacle is identity investment. Beliefs tied to social belonging are the hardest to question. Disagreeing risks exclusion. The nervous system treats exclusion as threat. This is why groupthink persists even among intelligent individuals. Deep thinkers accept isolation as a temporary cost. They do not need immediate validation. They prefer accuracy over applause. This does not make them superior. It makes them lonely at times, but it also makes them harder to deceive. Decision-making psychology reveals something uncomfortable. Most decisions are made emotionally and justified rationally afterward. The explanation comes after the choice. Free will exists, but it operates within constraints most people never examine. To reclaim agency, you must observe the moment a decision forms, not when it is explained. That moment is subtle: a feeling, a pull, an aversion. If you pause there, you can intervene. If you miss it, the choice feels inevitable. Deep thinking trains this pause. It asks, what am I avoiding right now? What outcome am I attached to? What fear is steering me? This level of honesty destabilizes comfort, but increases clarity. Clarity is not certainty. Clarity is seeing variables as they are, not as you wish them to be. The greatest cognitive trap is believing clarity feels good. It does not. Clarity often feels cold, empty, stripped of justification. It removes emotional cushioning. This is why people retreat back into bias after brief moments of insight. Deep thinking is sustained discomfort, but it is also liberation. Because once you see how your mind distorts reality, you stop trusting it blindly. You use it deliberately. You become less reactive, less predictable, harder to manipulate. This is the threshold. From here, the question is no longer, how do I think better? It becomes, how do I rewire the system that produces thought? That is where this moves next. Clarity does not arrive by accident. It is built. Once you understand that your thoughts are not neutral, that emotions often decide before logic arrives, and that identity quietly shapes perception, the next step becomes unavoidable. You either redesign the system or you remain inside it. There is no middle ground. Awareness without restructuring turns into frustration. Insight without discipline becomes paralysis. Rewiring the mind is not self-help. It is internal engineering. Most people attempt change at the weakest level: behavior. They try to act differently while keeping the same emotional triggers, the same identity, the same reward system. This fails because behavior is the final output, not the source. When pressure increases, the system reverts to its original configuration. To change outcomes consistently, you must alter 3 layers: emotional regulation, identity framing, and decision architecture. Start with emotion, because emotion is the gatekeeper. Emotions are not enemies. They are signals generated by the nervous system to guide survival. The problem is not emotion, it is unexamined emotion. When emotion spikes, the brain shifts into threat mode. Attention narrows, nuance disappears, speed replaces accuracy. This was useful when danger was physical. It is destructive when danger is psychological or social. Rewiring begins by training yourself to stay present under emotional load. This does not mean suppressing feeling. Suppression stores pressure. Pressure eventually leaks. Regulation means allowing the sensation without allowing it to dictate action. The ability to sit inside discomfort without reacting is the foundation of power. It creates time. Time creates options. Most people collapse into reaction because they mistake urgency for importance. Urgency is often manufactured by others or by the nervous system itself. Not every spike requires a response. Not every thought deserves attention. The disciplined mind learns to pause automatically. This pause is not hesitation, it is command. From there, identity must be addressed. Identity is the internal story of who you are allowed to be. It determines what choices feel like you and which feel forbidden. The subconscious obeys identity more than desire. This is why people sabotage goals that conflict with self-image. If you see yourself as passive, assertiveness feels unnatural. If you see yourself as loyal, boundaries feel like betrayal. If you see yourself as moral, strategic behavior feels wrong. Rewiring requires loosening identity. This does not mean becoming nothing. It means becoming flexible, replacing rigid labels with functional roles. Instead of "this is who I am," the internal language shifts to "this is a behavior I can choose when appropriate." Power lives in optionality. To rewire identity, behavior must be experienced, not imagined. The nervous system updates through action. You act differently while tolerating the discomfort of identity violation. Over time, the system recalibrates. What once felt wrong becomes neutral. What felt impossible becomes available. This process feels destabilizing. That is expected. Stability built on limitation is fragile. Instability during growth is temporary. Decision-making psychology sits on top of this structure. Decisions are rarely isolated events. They are chains. Small choices accumulate into patterns. Patterns become trajectories. The mind prefers immediate relief over long-term coherence. This bias must be countered deliberately. High-level decision-makers reduce complexity by designing rules in advance. Not rigid rules, principles. Principles prevent emotional hijacking by narrowing choice under pressure. For example, do not make decisions when emotionally flooded. Do not explain yourself unnecessarily. Do not commit under urgency. Do not negotiate from fear. These are not moral rules, they are structural safeguards. Another technique is removing decisions altogether. Environment shapes behavior more than willpower. If temptation is constant, resistance drains energy. Disciplined individuals design environments that support desired behavior and make unwanted behavior inconvenient. This is not weakness, it is intelligence. Rewiring also requires understanding reward. The brain repeats what is rewarded. If destructive habits provide relief, excitement, or validation, they will persist. Punishment rarely works long-term. The system must be offered alternative rewards that satisfy the same underlying need. This is where most fail. They remove coping mechanisms without replacing them. The mind rebels, old patterns return stronger. Clarity grows when rewards align with long-term identity rather than short-term relief. Another critical element is language. Internal dialogue shapes perception. Vague language creates vague thought. Precise language sharpens awareness. Instead of "I feel bad," identify the sensation, tension, heat, pressure, restlessness. Naming reduces intensity. This is neurological. The same applies externally. Speak with intention, fewer words, cleaner structure, silence where others ramble. This shifts how you are perceived and how you perceive yourself. Rewiring is cumulative. Small, consistent changes alter baseline. The nervous system adapts. What once triggered reaction becomes tolerable. What once felt threatening becomes manageable. This is emotional discipline. Discipline is not force, it is alignment. When identity, environment, and principles support the same direction, effort decreases, clarity increases. This is also where growth becomes visible to others. Calm under pressure, delayed response, measured speech. People interpret this as confidence or authority. It is neither, it is regulation. Power does not rush. There is one more layer that cannot be ignored: truth. Rewiring the mind exposes uncomfortable truths about motivation. Many choices are driven by avoidance, not desire. Many ambitions are borrowed. Many values are performative. Seeing this can feel hollow. This hollow space is necessary, because transformation requires subtraction before addition. False certainty must dissolve before real clarity forms. This is why people retreat just before breakthrough. The old self is dissolving, the new one is not yet formed. The in-between feels empty, meaningless, dangerous. Those who cannot tolerate this return to familiar patterns. Those who stay become something else. Not louder, not aggressive, not visible, stable. There is a moment that arrives quietly without ceremony when the old self no longer works. It is not dramatic. There is no collapse in public, no announcement, no external validation. It arrives internally as a subtle incompatibility between who you have been pretending to be and what you now see clearly. The behaviors still function, but they feel hollow. The narratives still exist, but they feel thin. The reactions still fire, but they no longer convince you. This is not confusion. This is truth beginning to override identity. Truth is not moral. It is not comforting. It does not care about your past effort, your intentions, or your sacrifices. Truth simply reveals what is, and when it appears consistently enough, identity fractures. Identity collapse is not pathology. It is not weakness. It is the inevitable consequence of sustained awareness. Once you see how your mind was programmed, how your reactions were conditioned, how your decisions were shaped, the illusion of a fixed self dissolves. This is where most people turn back. They feel the ground disappear. The labels that once anchored them, good, loyal, disciplined, broken, ambitious, victim, leader, lose solidity. Without labels, the ego panics. It interprets fluidity as death. It demands a new story immediately. This urgency is dangerous. True transformation requires staying in the absence of story long enough for something real to form. Most people rush to rebuild identity because emptiness feels threatening. They replace one mask with another: spiritual, intellectual, dominant, detached, moral, superior. The costume changes, the structure remains. This is not transformation, it is adaptation. Transformation happens when you resist the urge to solidify too soon. In this phase, truth becomes sharper. Motivations reveal themselves without decoration. You see how often you acted to avoid discomfort rather than pursue meaning. How often you chose familiarity over coherence. How often fear disguised itself as principle. This clarity is brutal because it removes excuses. But it is also stabilizing, because once excuses disappear, responsibility returns, and responsibility is power. Personal transformation is not becoming better, it is becoming more aligned with reality. This alignment produces changes others notice but rarely understand. Your reactions slow, your words reduce, your tolerance for noise decreases. You stop explaining yourself to people who cannot hear you, not out of arrogance, out of efficiency. You also stop seeking permission. Not because you are rebellious, but because you no longer require external approval to validate internal coherence. This is where truth reshapes decision-making. Decisions stop being emotional negotiations and become strategic expressions of values you have verified through experience, not values you inherited, not values you perform, values you have tested under pressure. Truth also forces a reckoning with power. You see clearly that power itself is neutral. It magnifies intent. Used unconsciously, it destroys. Used deliberately, it stabilizes. Avoiding power does not make you virtuous, it makes you vulnerable. Wielding power without self-mastery makes you dangerous. The integrated individual accepts power without obsession. They do not chase control, they cultivate capability. Control emerges naturally when others sense consistency, regulation, and clarity. This is why transformed individuals are often misread. Some interpret them as cold, others as confident, others as intimidating. None of these labels matter. Perception belongs to the observer. What matters is internal order. Internal order means your actions match your understanding. Your understanding matches reality, and your emotions no longer hijack either. Truth also dissolves victimhood. Not by denying harm, but by removing identity attachment to it. Pain can be acknowledged without being central. History can be remembered without being rehearsed. Responsibility returns where agency exists. This does not erase compassion, it deepens it, because you see how unconscious most behavior is, how programmed, how reactive. You stop expecting awareness from those who have never faced themselves. You also stop trying to save them. This is a critical shift. Not everyone wants truth. Many want reassurance. Others want distraction. Some want permission to remain unchanged. Truth threatens all of these. Offering it indiscriminately creates resistance and hostility. The transformed individual learns restraint. Silence becomes strategic, not secretive, selective. Identity at this stage becomes functional rather than symbolic. You adopt roles as needed and release them when they no longer serve. There is no over-identification, no collapse when roles end. Work is work. Relationships are relationships. Influence is influence. None of these define you completely. This flexibility is often mistaken for detachment. It is not. It is non-attachment with engagement. You care deeply, but you are not controlled by outcomes. This is where many misunderstand transformation. They believe it leads to isolation or emotional numbness. The opposite is true. Emotion becomes cleaner. Joy is quieter but deeper. Pain is sharper but shorter. Anger appears and passes without commandeering behavior. Truth strips away dramatization. There is also loss. You lose the comfort of illusion, the pleasure of righteous outrage, the simplicity of blame, the warmth of belonging to narratives that no longer convince you. Some relationships thin, others dissolve, not because you reject people, but because resonance fades. This loss is the price of clarity. Most are unwilling to pay it. Those who do discover something unexpected on the other side, peace that is not dependent on circumstances. Not happiness, peace. Peace comes from internal congruence. Nothing is pulling against itself. Desire and discipline align. Thought and action converge. Identity stops arguing with reality. This is when personal transformation completes its first full cycle. Not with arrival, but with stability. From here, growth is no longer frantic, it is deliberate. The nervous system trusts itself. Decisions are made without self-betrayal. Boundaries are enforced without hostility. Ambition exists without desperation. You become difficult to manipulate because you are no longer negotiating with unresolved fear. You are also difficult to impress. Truth removes the hunger for illusion. And here is the final understanding, the one that reframes everything that came before. The Machiavellian mindset, shadow integration, deep thinking, and mental rewiring were never about controlling others. They were about ending unconscious self-control by forces you never consented to. Once that control ends, influence becomes a side effect, not a goal. You move differently. You listen more than you speak. You act once cleanly when others hesitate. You do not rush clarity. You do not chase power. And because of that, power recognizes you. Not loudly, not publicly, quietly. This is not an ending. It is a threshold. Beyond it, life no longer feels like a reaction to circumstances. It feels authored. And that is the difference between existing inside systems and standing above them without needing to announce it. This is where the story closes. Not with dominance, not with conquest, but with self-possession. And that is the rarest form of power there is.